Hi, this is Alex from devstories.eu. Terraform Fundamentals, Episode 9 of 13. Not every piece of infrastructure in your cloud environment was built by the Terraform code you are currently writing. Yet your code still needs a way to connect to those existing systems safely without accidentally altering them. Querying with data sources is exactly how you handle this. A major point of confusion when learning Terraform is the difference between a resource block and a data block. Let us clear that up right now. A resource block tells Terraform to create, update, and own an infrastructure object. A data block only performs a read-only lookup. It asks the provider API to find an existing object and return its details so your configuration can read those details. This read-only capability is the foundation of a decoupled infrastructure architecture. Consider a standard enterprise setup. A centralized networking team builds and manages the corporate virtual network. As an application developer, you need to deploy an Azure virtual machine and attach it to that exact network. You do not own the network code. You also should not hard-code the network's unique ID into your Terraform files, because hard-coded IDs break easily if environments are ever recreated. Instead, you just look the network up. You do this by defining a data block. The syntax looks very much like a resource block. You start with the keyword data. Next, you specify the data source type, such as Azure RM Virtual Network. Then you give it a local name, like corporate, which you will use to reference it later in your code. Inside the block, you define the search arguments. These act as strict filters. You might pass the human-readable name of the virtual network and the resource group it belongs to. Terraform uses these arguments to construct a query. When you run a Terraform plan, Terraform reaches out to the Azure API and searches for a virtual network that matches your filters. If the API returns exactly one match, Terraform downloads the properties of that network into memory. If the query returns 0 matches, or if the filters are too loose and return multiple matches, Terraform stops immediately and throws an error. This strictness is intentional. It prevents you from accidentally deploying your application into the wrong subnet or environment. Once the data source successfully fetches the information, you can extract any exported attribute from it. The syntax for referencing a data source is highly structured. You start with the word data, followed by a dot, the data source type, a dot, your local name, and finally the specific attribute you need. In our scenario, you would type data.azuremvirtualnetwork.corporate.id. You pass that specific string right into your virtual machine resource block, entirely bypassing the need to hard-code a static value. Here's the part that matters. Data sources allow you to treat your surrounding infrastructure as a dynamic service. You do not have to build the environment to interact with it, and you can safely stitch independent workspaces together simply by querying the exact identifiers you need at runtime. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you picked up something new.